I don't remember exactly how old I was at the time, maybe 14 or 15. I had this really crazy guy that lived on my street. Everyone called him Crazy Mike, and he really was as crazy as you could imagine, but more on him in a minute. I had this one friend that was a little wild. Let's call him Charlie. He was kind of the adventurous friend that got me to do some crazy stuff. We went through a phase, I have about 2 or 3 months, where we would hang out a lot. It was honestly a lot of fun. One of the things we would do is explore the nearby woods. There was a lot of wildlife, and anyone could go out there and explore as far as they wanted. We lived on a mountain, and we would hike up the mountain, and when we had enough for the day, we'd hike back down. We normally took the regular roads back down because it was just a little bit easier to get home that way. My friend lived a few roads up from me, so I would walk to his house with him, and then go home by myself. I remember this one particular day we had gone hiking through the creek. Bear in mind, it was freezing outside at the time. There was snow on the ground and a lot of the water was frozen. At one point, we had the bright idea of walking on the ice. As you might imagine, we fell into the water. It wasn't very deep or anything, not even enough to get above our chest wet. But we were dripping with water, and it was about 5 degrees outside, and there was snow on the ground. But being the crazy kids we were, it didn't stop us. We just continued hiking even after we got soaking wet. I don't know if we just had a really high tolerance to the cold or it was adrenaline. We were all good. We continued on for a couple hours that day, but after a certain point, I finally talked him into heading home for the day. He agreed, and we went out and got on the road. We made our way back down like usual. This is the point when I started freezing. I was too cold. And I knew my body. I knew that I was in some kind of danger, like getting near hypothermia or something. When we got to my friend's house, he was more than willing to let me come in and warm up for a few minutes. But just as we were getting to his house, my mom called me. She was really angry with me because I hadn't answered my phone in an hour. I tried explaining the situation to her, but she just screamed at me over and over again to come home. So, I had to walk the rest of the way home, and that was that. This is where Crazy Mike comes in. Because he lives one road above me, and it saves me about 10 minutes of walking if I cut through a part of his property to get to my house. He had a big fence, but so did his neighbor. There was a small walkway kind of area between the two spots. I was obviously in a rush to get back home and warm up. In fact, I was jogging most of the way. I hadn't heard anything about Crazy Mike by that point, so I figured it would be okay if I cut through his property this one time. I started going through, and that was when he came out of his house with an assault rifle. He pointed it at me and screamed at me like a maniac. Of course, I turned around and sprinted away. I ran all the way back home and told my mom. She thought I was exaggerating and that I shouldn't be cutting through people's property anyway. That was when I started asking people around the area about him. I heard some stories about Crazy Mike and some of the things he would do. I heard that he was a conspiracy theorist, drug dealer, criminal, felon, and a bunch of other stuff. If I had to sum it all up in a single phrase, a bad guy. Whoever I asked never had anything good to say about him. And the part that freaked me out was that I still had to pass Crazy Mike's house on my way home. I didn't have to cut through his property, but I did still have to walk in front of his house on the road to get to my house. And that made me uncomfortable, because now I was constantly worried that I was going to get shot or something. I still would go hiking with Charlie and all that, and after a couple of times of going home, there was no incident. So I thought that was going to be the end of it. However, I noticed something else. He had video cameras on the outside of its property looking out onto the road. I had never noticed them before, but now that I was aware of his insanity, I paid a little more attention. Whenever I walked by, the cameras would follow me. What freaks me out the most was that they were manually operated cameras. They weren't the kind of cameras that just follow motion around. He was sitting there operating those cameras every single time I walked by, watching me. I'm not sure if he was recording all the footage or not, but he made me uncomfortable either way. I remember there was one time when I was walking home from Charlie's house at night. It must have been 10 or 11. It was really late, and even then the cameras followed me as I walked by. I thought that was going to be it, that nothing else was going to happen between me and Crazy Mike. Well, I was dead wrong. It was still during that same winter season, and I was walking home during a blizzard. That was just the kind of guy I was. My mom was going to be ordering pizza that night, and I didn't want to miss it. I passed by Crazy Mike's like I always did, and that was when something unexpected happened. He had this giant fence, and it had to have been 15 feet tall, and it was made of really thick wood. Part of it opened up, and a dog ran out after me. I couldn't tell what kind of dog it was, but it was angry and barking at me really loud. It ran after me, and I could tell that it was going to bite me as hard as it could. I got a seriously violent vibe from that dog. I was lucky that I was in really good shape and managed to sprint away. Didn't slip or nothing. That situation could have turned really bad really fast. Anyway, my family ended up moving a few weeks later for unrelated reasons. My mom actually got a new job in a different state, so that was the end of my experience with Crazy Mike. I'm from northern New York. We get some really cold winters. When I was around 5 or 6, I was walking to the local store with my aunt. It was a cold night and it was already dark. This was about 6 o'clock at night. Where I grew up was just a small village where everybody knew everybody. We were walking on a well-traveled street. There was snow on the ground. For some reason, I looked behind me, and there was someone wearing all dark clothing walking very fast behind us. I told my aunt. She told me to walk faster. Being little, it was hard for me to walk faster in the snow. My aunt seemed nervous about this person behind us. Now I have to say here that my aunt was a big woman, not somebody who scared easy, but she seemed like she was scared. As we kept walking, this person behind us stayed about 5 feet. This had never happened before in our small village. Every time we got to a street light, the person behind would hide their face so we couldn't identify them. When we got to the store, my aunt told the lady behind the counter what had happened. She called our village cop who came to the store. He went out and looked for the person. The village cop didn't find whoever it was. We didn't walk back home that night. My aunt called home and my grandfather came and got us. My aunt told me years later that she had the feeling that that person behind us that night was going to do us harm. I mentioned to my aunt that when I looked behind me one time, that I thought the person behind us was carrying something. I don't know what that person was going to do that night, but I still have nightmares about it. It never happened again, but I always watched around me when I was walking after dark. I'm still afraid to be alone after dark even now. This happened around 1988 or 1989. Winter is long and cold up here, but fun nonetheless. As a child, I would stay outside all day playing in the snow, and then having to soak my hands in warm water for 10 minutes just to get the feeling back in them. Stupid or not, these were the best times of my life. However, the winter when I was in 5th grade, something horrible would be set in motion in my town. School had just let out for Christmas break when the first body was found. His name was Mike Keller, and he was a 2nd grader at Mount Vernon. The reports on the news said he had been beaten severely, but he also had multiple stab wounds that were determined to be the cause of death. I can't say that the murderer caused an uproar. That would come later, but it certainly got folks' attention. It didn't put a dent in my thick head. If my mom mentioned it to me, I don't recall it. My usual life continued unabated. Day after day, I would spend my time playing in the snow, only taking breaks to eat and play Minecraft. Things didn't really ramp up until another kid was found. This one turned out to be from my neck of the woods. The police reports echoed that of the previous murder, although the stab wounds were far more numerous than on the body of Keller. And that was when the parents, county-wide, started taking the threat more seriously. I'm sure every kid got the same speech as I did. warning of the dangers of talking to people you don't know. When everyone would discover the truth behind the murders, it would be much more horrible than they expected. If any kid paid attention to their parents' warnings, I wasn't one of them. My mom's words went in one ear and out the other. Since the snow had melted after Christmas Day, I made plans to meet up with my friends at our hand-built fort in the woods. But when I got there, the only people around were two kids I didn't know very well. One was a 7th grader and the other was a year behind me. He went to the same school as I did, and the rumor was that he had been held back twice. From the looks of him, the rumors were true. Despite only being slightly taller than me, he was already showing signs of a mustache. When it comes to the older kid, I didn't know much about him other than he had a reputation for being mean to younger kids. So the second I saw him, I got very nervous. The two of them, whose names I'm not going to mention here for the reason you'll see soon, were acting like they were best friends despite never talking to me before. When the older boy asked me if friends were on their way, I foolishly told the truth. If they weren't already at the fort, they probably wouldn't be coming. This must have been the answer they were hoping for, because as soon as I said it, they began their attack. The older boy sucker punched me to the ground. I came very close to passing out. Now I know if I had, I would have been number 3 on their hit list. But somehow, I stayed awake. I used a nearby tree to get to my feet just in time to see the younger kid pull a folding knife from his pocket. The older kid was swinging a wooden bat around. When they saw me stand up, the older boy ran up to me and swung for my head. I ducked, but he was close enough to rip a lock of hair out when the bat hit the tree above me. I figured the kid with the knife was coming after me next, so I booked it out of there. My legs were still a little rubbery, but I knew if I stopped, I was dead. The older kid was right on my heels, and my lungs were burning terribly. However, I was fortunate enough to live on the edge of the woods and made it inside my house before they caught up with me. I ran into my mom, and I breathlessly tried to explain what had just happened. She understood enough to be upset and yelled for my dad to call the police. My mom quickly explained the situation to him, and he relayed it to the dispatcher. The police came quick, and I told them what had happened and who did it. They had no problem finding the boys. They must have known it was over for them, and they both went home and waited. The brutality of the murders was taken into consideration, and it was decided to keep them in custody until their trials. Naturally, the DA wanted to try them as adults, but they were just a bit too young. Since each boy was blaming the other, despite both being responsible, they were tried separately. Neither showed any remorse, and as a result they were given life for each murder, and 15 to 25 for the attempt on my life.